Our COP26 legacy shaping the future of climate leadership. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'd like to start by saying that humanity has so much to gain through partnership and solidarity, not least a greener, more prosperous and just future. Obviously, progress is stalled by war, and this makes what is happening in Ukraine heartbreaking twice over. As Mary Robinson, Chair of the Elders, wrote last week, it is all the more grotesque that the world has been plunged into this fresh crisis by the choices made by one individual, President Putin, when we are already grappling with another existential threat, the climate crisis. We stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine who are resisting the assault on their homeland, and with the brave Russian citizens who are publicly voicing their own opposition to the war. And we all look forward to the end of these troubled and unsettling times. I've been asked to speak about the COP26 legacy and shaping the future of climate leadership. COP26 left no doubt about the scale of action needed to tackle climate change. With $130 trillion of private capital committed to hitting net zero emissions targets by 2050, there's a lot of opportunity for well-regulated businesses to play for. The Committee on Climate Change said COP26 in Glasgow marked a step forward in global efforts to address climate change, including a material increase in ambitions to reduce emissions across the world, finalisation of rules on reporting emissions and international carbon trading, and the launch of a range of new initiatives and sector deals. But of course, despite gains, the climate emergency continues to escalate. Last week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said, the world faces unavoidable multiple climate hazards over the next 2 decades with global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Even temporarily exceeding this warming limit will result in additional severe impacts, some of which will be irreversible. Climate impacts aren't only something that happens in the global south, they are here and now and getting worse. 2 weeks ago, the Met Office named 3 major storms in 1 week for the first time. In Hereford, a city usually associated with strength, there have been 15 floods on the River Wye over 5 metres high since 1795. 7 of those have been since the year 2000. 5 have been in the last 3 years, including the biggest. In November, Storm Arwen hit the east coast, leading to waves over 10 metres tall. Had these waves coincided with a high or spring tide, impacts could have been worse than in 1953, when 307 lives were lost on land and more than 177 people were lost at sea in the east coast surge. Every business should be incorporating climate resilience into every single one of their decisions from now on. Often, we hear that the biggest blocker for businesses taking action on environmental issues is that clients are more likely to prioritise cost savings. But no one wants to live in an energy-efficient house that could be washed away in a flood. No one can deliver products to your home on roads that have subsided. And no one can work in an office with no power. Just before COP26, the Environment Agency published our 3rd adaptation report under the Climate Change Act, describing the need for a step change in the national approach to adaptation. The report shows that last year, more than 76,000 incidents were reported to the Environment Agency's Incident Management Service, including flood, drought, fires, fish kills, and pollution incidents. That's 1 every 7 minutes, 24 hours a day. Climate change is increasing their severity, frequency, and duration. In the press release, I said it is a case of adapt or die. We are preparing for this and have good foundations. On the middle Saturday of COP26, millions of people in England were protected from the highest tide of the year because we operated the Boston Barrier, the Hull Barrier, and the Thames Barrier. Those millions of people didn't realise they were able to go about their days normally because of the government's investment and the Environment Agency's work. But as the climate crisis escalates, we cannot rely on public interventions alone to manage threats. And we certainly cannot allow the natural environment to carry the risk. If COP26 is to go down in the history books as a success, it must mark the point when the supertanker of global finance began to turn into the climate emergency and set its course towards climate prosperity. And here's what I mean. The 2021 National Infrastructure and Construction Pipeline sets out nearly £650 billion of public and private infrastructure investment in the UK by 2030. The Infrastructure and Projects Authority has analysed over £200 billion of this up to 2024-25. This includes national investments in schools, transport and utilities. Compared to the IPA's overall £200 billion figure, the £3 billion for flood and coastal defences in England by 2024-25, part of a record-breaking public investment in England, looks like a thin green line of defence. This suggests that worryingly few investors are considering the physical risks of climate change. The money and desire for climate resilient investments are there, but the expertise is spread unevenly across the public and private sectors. Growth is outpacing understanding, which brings other risks. The Treasury commissioned the Dasgupta review to look at the economics of biodiversity. We need a similar review, in my opinion, to assess the true cost of climate impacts and the value of investing in resilience. This analysis will help identify key sectors, assess the best balance of private and public investment, and identify the best role of public action to support private investment. Whereas reducing emissions is something that brings benefits to the whole world, adaptation is applied in specific places. This means listening to local communities and businesses and empowering them to make the right choices for their area and supply chain. This is a key component of the Environment Agency's flood and coastal erosion risk management strategy. In this, we talk about an adaptive pathways approach. This helps ensure that local plans are agile to the latest climate science, growth projections, investment opportunities, and other changes to local environments. And it helps local communities make timely decisions to unlock growth and prosperity. The Thames Barrier and its associated defences play a vital role in protecting London from tidal flood risk, protecting over 1.4 million people and 500,000 properties worth over £321 billion from flooding. The Thames Barrier itself illustrates a simple example of an adaptive pathway. Originally expected to last until 2030, the barrier will protect London until 2070, 100 years after it was designed, because the embankment foundations were built to enable them to be raised. The private sector is beginning to show leadership on adaptation and resilience. The Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, which I co-chair, brings together 126 members featuring both governments and investors with over $25 trillion in assets. It is looking at how investors can systematically incorporate physical climate risks, adaptation and resilience into cash flow modelling and asset valuation practices. This will help investors to quantify investments in the resilience of assets and the benefits associated with reduced costs and more reliable revenue streams. Where better than to pilot this approach than as part of the new National Infrastructure Bank? The government needs to be sending joined-up signals to the private sector, so I was pleased to see last month's open letter from the Business Secretary to economic regulators, emphasising resilience and climate change. Because climate issues are interconnected, environmental regulators need to be in lockstep with economic and financial regulators. Last year, the UK government also said nationally significant infrastructure projects will need to ensure biodiversity net gain. Resilience is the missing link between investment in net zero and nature. Nature-based solutions provide cost-effective adaptation. For example, flood management, which can also deliver net zero benefits in the form of carbon capture. In October, analysis from the Green Finance Institute said that £44 to £97 billion of additional investment is needed over the next decade to meet the UK's nature-related targets. The Green Finance Institute's Hive, backed by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, is working with the financial sector to build momentum for investment, showcasing examples of private investments in nature-based solutions. The argument that clients want cost savings over environmental leadership is falling away. As we can see from campaigning organisations like Make My Money Matter and Share Action to the mainstream of finance, people are waking up to their power as investors. Customers and investors are increasingly aware, frustrated and angry that companies they previously identified with are carrying out environmentally destructive activities. This means that company boards and executives can no longer see environmental damage as an externality. Things such as pollution to air and water, carbon emissions, activities that are harmful to nature, and buildings that will not stand up to climate impacts. Public pressure is mounting. Businesses that embrace that will be rewarded for leadership. The public know what responsible looks like. Get this right, and business can stay competitive, deliver prosperity for local communities, and restore nature. Last week's IPCC report offers a glimmer of hope. The window to deliver climate resilience is still there, but it is closing fast. I will finish with the poignant words spoken by Svetlana Krakowska, Ukraine's delegate to the IPCC, which stand as a reminder of everything that we must fight for. We will not surrender in Ukraine, and we hope the world will not surrender in building a climate resilient future. Thank you very much.